Welcome to week 3 of surviving your rookie year of teaching. It's been a while since we've checked in on Mr. Solid Teacher's classroom. Let's have a peek.
Notice how completely different this is from the painting we looked at yesterday, the Wilton Diptych, right? All angels, they're all lined up. Mary's got the baby Jesus. Everyone's like, oh, right? This is totally different. Look at the sensuality. Look at the fluid lines and the rich colors and textures. Look at how beautiful that cloth is and her hair coming all the way down. She's there in the middle, and she's up on this clamshell, right? And she's going to take that one step. You can see her foot's lifted. That's because she's about to step onto the earth. She's going from the old world into the new. And when she takes that step, it's going to transform the world. It's going to bring all of this sensuality and humanness back into culture. She's going to change everything forever.
Wow, that was really some inspired teaching up there. I mean, he knows so much about art history and his delivery. He had so much passion, so much life. I mean, the students were sitting at the edge of their seats. Wow, Mr. Solid Teacher, that was really a joy to watch. But I'd like to make 2 observations about that particular moment of instruction. Number 1, clearly Mr. Solid Teacher knows his subject matter, and he knows it deeply. Number 2, he's just so comfortable in front of the kids. It looks like he was born to have that role. And we think both of those things are probably true about you as well. You know how to conjugate verbs in another language, solve linear equations, analyze a poem, and we imagine one of the reasons you went into teaching in the first place is because you like getting up in front of a group. Both of those things are really important. However, that's not just your job anymore. Your job is not just to say and think and read and write smart things. It's actually to get other people to say and think and read and write smart things. And if we look again at Mr. Solid Teacher's class, I'm not sure what his students were thinking about. He was in no way asking them to produce any evidence of their learning. So not only was there no evidence of student learning in that clip, there was also really low participation. Actually, no participation at all. Students weren't asked to read or write or ask or answer questions about the information that Mr. Solid Teacher was giving them. And in fact, they could kind of just sit there passively and receive all of his wisdom. Now, that clip might be great for Hollywood versions of teaching, right? I mean, what a fantastic delivery. It reminded me of when Robin Williams jumps on the desk in Dead Poets Society, or Edward James Olmos is holding court in his AP Calculus class in East Los Angeles. It was great theater, very entertaining, but still no actual evidence of student thought. So a cognitive psychologist looking at that same clip, I think would have a very different take than a Hollywood film director. And one cognitive psychologist that we like a lot here at the Math Teacher Residency Program is the University of Virginia's Daniel Willingham. Professor Willingham teaches us that our brain is actually a relatively weak muscle, that there are many things competing for our brain's attention, and we really struggle to focus on any one thing for a sustained period of time. He articulates a principle for teachers that we really like, where he says, memory is the residue of thought, meaning the longer you can actually get your brain to think about some information, to process it, to sit with it for a while, the better chance you have of committing that information to your long-term memory, so it's easier to access it when you need to out of your short-term memory. And there are a lot of implications for teachers here in terms of how we present new information and how we get students to manipulate that information when we're presenting it, particularly for the first time. And one educator who's thought a lot about how that principle plays out in the classroom is Uncommon School's Doug Lemov. So we're really big fans of Doug's book, Teach Like a Champion, and we highly recommend it to all of you out there. And one of the key concepts that he talks about in this book is the concept of ratio. That is, what's the amount of thinking, talking, and active brain work that a teacher is doing in the class in comparison to the amount of thinking and active brain work that his students are doing in a class period. And that's what this week's lecture is all about, ratio. How you can boost the ratio in your class so that it's your students who are doing more of the heavy lifting. Let's think about ratio as having two dimensions, one dealing with quantity, the other dealing with quality. By quantity, we're talking about student participation. How many students are being asked to complete a particular task in the lesson? It goes all the way from no students being asked, all the way to every student feeling accountable for participating in a task. When we talk about ratio quality, we think about the rigor of the task. At the high end, we're talking about tasks that are extremely rigorous, demanding, where students have to give serious, sustained thought to perform the task. At the low end are very, very simple tasks that you can do almost automatically. We've represented that relationship in a graph here. You'll see that on the vertical axis, we're talking about ratio quality, which we'll call thinking ratio. How much thought do students need to put into the task? And on the horizontal axis, we're talking about participation ratio, quantity, the amount of students who have to complete the task. Let's return to Mr. Salateacher's classroom to analyze the ratio of his instruction. Students really weren't asked to participate in that lesson. There was nothing for them to actually do, and the only task involved that they had to think about was just sort of sitting there and listening, which is not a very rigorous thinking task. So we would plot the ratio of that class in the lower left-hand quadrant of our graph, representing both low participation and low thinking ratio. Come to think of it, we're engaged in some really low ratio teaching ourselves right now. I mean, hey, I'm just talking into the camera. I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what you're thinking about. You could have your Facebook page open, your email, you're like doing some online shopping, and I'm just talking to you, not asking you to think about anything at all. The best I can think of is saying like, hey, you in Latvia, what are the two components of ratio? But that's not so easy in this environment. So instead, we'll go with this. Let's jump back into Mr. Salateacher's classroom for a second. Maybe we rush to judgment about his ratio. Let's look at another moment of his class and see if he can boost that ratio up just a little bit.
Okay, everyone. What I want you to do now is I'm going to give you 30 seconds to jot down all of the details that I mentioned to you. Everything I mentioned to you, I want you to jot it down. Details about gaze, about space in the painting, shape, especially details about color, all those details about color I said. I want you to jot all those down from the painting. Got it? Good. Go!
Hey, nice job, Mr. Salateacher. You definitely got the ratio up a little bit more in that moment of the class. By asking all the students to take notes and holding them accountable for taking those notes, you got everyone to participate in your lesson, and that's great. But when we look at the actual task that you gave them, the rigor really wasn't there. All they had to do was regurgitate information that you just shared with them a moment ago. So it wasn't very high quality thinking ratio in that class. Ultimately, we would plot it in the lower right-hand quadrant of our graph, representing high participation ratio and low thinking ratio. But the class isn't over yet. Let's see what happens next.
Which of the details that you just jotted down about Botticelli's Venus could be attributed to the fact that it was the merchant Medici family that sponsored this painting and not the church? Which of these details shows merchant sponsorship? Kevin.
It could be the fact that it is the...
Whoa, that was a rigorous question. You just really boosted the thinking ratio in your class, Mr. Salateacher, by asking such a challenging question, and props to you. You're training some future art historians in there. But we still have to put you in the upper left-hand quadrant of our ratio chart, representing higher thinking ratio, but still low participation ratio. You did just call on one student, Kevin, to answer that question, so we can't give you high marks for participation. By the way, though, the fact that you cold call Kevin, that you didn't ask for a hand first, that does give you a little bump in participation ratio, more so than if you just asked for a volunteer. The more you cold call over the course of a class, the more likely it is that students are going to think about every question you ask in anticipation of getting called on. So, Mr. Salateacher, sorry to tell you, you still don't get our ratio seal of approval. You've demonstrated that you can get the participation ratio up, and you've demonstrated that you can get the thinking ratio up as well with that great question you just asked, but you still haven't brought those two things together to have both high quantity and high quality ratio at the same time. Fortunately, we know someone who can help. Her name is Val Joel.
Hi, I'm Valerie Joel. I work at Up Academy and I teach 7th grade math.
Val is here to talk to us about a technique that's sure to boost both the thinking and participation ratio in your class. It's called
Turn and talk.